Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Thursday, August 28th, and it's a great pleasure to have back in the studio again John Walters, who is a blogger who publishes the Vermont Political Observer. He has reported and written for both 7 Days and VT Digger, and was also a working reporter in Michigan and New Hampshire back in the good old days. And we're really glad and grateful to have him back on our program. John, thanks for making the time for this and for making a long drive down from farther north to be here today.
Well, that's fine. I never pass up an excuse to visit Manchester. So.
All right. Well, we're really glad you were able to make it and come down. And for those of you who aren't readers yet of the Vermont Political Observer, well, my suggestion is that you should be. And perhaps before we're done, John will give us the word on how you can become a subscriber of the blog post that he puts out just about every day now. It seems like you've been...
I shoot for 3 or 4 a week.
Well, they've been very frequent, and I always read them. And one of the posts that you started doing is one called News You Should View. It's sort of like an overview, I guess, of Vermont media and its coverage of events that have been going on in the state.
Yeah.
And that, of course, was quite intriguing to me. So I guess I just wondered, what inspired that idea? What gave you the idea that this was something that you needed to incorporate into the Political Observer?
To give credit where credit's due, I met Catherine Sims, a former state representative from the Northeast Kingdom, who I met her for coffee one day, and we were just chatting about this and that and the other thing. And she mentioned the idea of me sort of, because I do write about media occasionally in the blog, and usually it's bad stuff about the media, like how terrible the Burlington Free Press is and things like that. But she said that, you know, I might do a service by spotlighting good journalism in the state. And I thought about it for a while, and I decided to give it a try. And what I have discovered is that despite the fact that we have seen devastating losses in our news ecosystem, and it's a lot smaller than it used to be, I think people don't realize how much smaller it is than it used to be. But there are still good people who are doing good work. Especially impressive to me are the small weeklies around the state, like the Manchester Journal here, the Commons in Brattleboro, the Hardwick Gazette in Hardwick, which I'm on the board of. And there are a bunch of papers under the heading of the community news group around the greater Burlington area. And more as well. That's just a short list. But there are a lot of people who are doing really good work around the state, keeping their readers informed, and it's been a positive exercise. Sometimes I go into column day thinking, well, there really isn't much, but then I start looking around, and I easily find a half a dozen or more stories that are worth people's attention. So it's been a good exercise.
Well, it's certainly interesting to read, and to read about the coverage of things that are going on elsewhere in the state that I don't automatically, would know about. But I guess I just wondered, what you alluded to this a little bit there, but what has been the driving factor in reducing the number of jobs that are in newspapers and other media? I mean, I'm thinking back to my own experience where, I've been in newsrooms where we started off with 3 or 4 or 5 reporters, and then all of a sudden, one by one, you were down to 1 or 2 or fewer. It used to be, 3 or 4 editors. Your stories would get read 2 or 3 times to make sure that there weren't any little spelling mistakes, or
right.
You were factually accurate. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore in a lot of places, but it may be. I don't know. But it's not in a news story by any means that newspapers, traditional media are struggling. I mean, what do you think accounts for all that? We can't blame it all on the internet, I guess, but that was a big part of it as well.
A lot of it is the internet. Just devastated the traditional advertising sources for newspapers. with Craigslist and with Facebook and Amazon and Google, they're draining away the traditional sources. Newspapers used to get 2/3, 3/4 of their revenue from advertising, and now they can't count on anything like that. And the other thing, of course, is that the internet has drained away some of the potential readership, because there are so many things that you can turn your attention to. And at the same time, radio, which used to be a staple of local news coverage in our communities, is pretty much gone as anything other than a repeater of national content. I saw a figure that really struck me, which is that since, I think it's in the last 25 years, Vermont has lost 75% of its journalism jobs, which is just stunning, and I don't think we realize what we're missing. I've been around Vermont for about 15 years, and I remember the days of the Shumlin administration, which had its good points and it had its troubles. The EB-5 scandal was a big deal. His efforts to create single-payer health care were a big deal. Would those stories get anywhere near the kind of coverage today that they got back then? I doubt it. There were just so many more reporters around the State House and around state government back then than there are now. Would any news organization have the resources and commitment to dig out the EB-5 scandal, which took years to uncover? I suspect that one reason for Governor Phil Scott's enduring popularity is that the watchdogs are largely absent. There isn't as much critical news coverage, skeptical, probing news coverage of state government as there used to be. And I think he has benefited from that. There are moves afoot to sort of reinvent journalism, largely as a nonprofit enterprise. The Commons in Brattleboro, the Gazette in Hardwick, the Bridge in Montpelier are nonprofit, locally controlled entities now. The University of Vermont Center for Community News is heavily involved in trying to reinvent journalism as a nonprofit force. And there's a lot of promise in that area, but the transition is really rough. It requires a whole new sets of skills for, journalists who aren't used to having to acquire, teaching an old dog new tricks. So it's a rough transition. It's an uncertain transition. There's a lot of promise in it, but it hasn't started to pay off yet. I can tell you from my work on the board of the Hardwick Gazette that it's not an easy selling proposition. We have a solid readership in our service area, but the financial support has yet to grow commensurate to the readership. And so the Gazette is a tiny operation that's struggling to stay afloat. We feel like there's a lot of promise in it, and if it wasn't for the Gazette, the communities in the area would have virtually no news coverage, because the regional dailies have pulled back their efforts to their core communities. It might be that, the Times-Argus or the Newport Daily Express or the St. Johnsbury Caledonian Record in the past might have, gone into Hardwick or Craftsbury or Cabot or Plainfield to cover stories of import. They have a lot less capability to do that now. So the Gazette is pretty much the Gazette or nothing in those communities. And the same thing is true around Vermont in lots of areas, lots of smaller communities. And if this nonprofit thing works out, things could get better. If it doesn't, we've already seen in many parts of this country that are much less fortunate than we are, where there are significant news deserts, where there is no news coverage to speak of at all. And that would be a very grim thing. I mean, you just think about when I write my weekly News You Should View, I often highlight stories that aren't really that important to the whole state. You know, a blow up on the select board, you know, in a way, you know, that doesn't really resonate, aside from the fact that, well, it happens everywhere, so, you know, what are you going to do?
Sooner or later.
But it's crucially important to the people who live there. And how else would they discover, you know, what's going on with their town government and their school board? And even things like, you know, fires and police calls and, you know, the garden variety stuff of daily life. These weeklies are really important, more so now than ever because of the retreat of other media outlets. So it's a time of transition, a time of great peril and great opportunity for journalism as a whole, I think.
And on top of all of that, we're seeing the cutbacks for NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Vermont Public just announced some layoffs.
15 jobs, I think, at Vermont Public, including 1 or 2 out of the newsroom. And then, of course, nationally, we have a lot of these radio stations or public access or public TV stations that they're the only source of news. I was reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times yesterday, about a radio station in Alaska where it's the only source of news for
and that
miles
includes,
around.
even if you're not concerned about your town government, they still are the provider of emergency information.
Right.
If there is a flood or an earthquake or some other disaster, a forest fire or something, you know, those stations are the only places where you might get the news, where you might get an evacuation order. And, you know, Trump and the Republicans cut public broadcasting because they're mad at NPR and PBS, but it's not going to affect NPR and PBS nearly as much as it's going to affect local stations around the country.
Yeah, it's as you say, an interesting time. I guess I find myself always trying to think, what's the way out of this? I mean, and you mentioned there the nonprofit model, and V.T. Digger was one of the first, I guess, that I was aware of anyway, that kind of championed that. And and I guess I just wondered, now they've been around since when, 2009, I think that was when Ann Galloway first got it started. So, you know, 15, 16 years later, do you think that that's enough time to kind of make an assessment of this, well, that model is working, you know, compared to, let's say, one of the other papers you mentioned that are maybe just beginning that journey?
Yeah. Digger has great promise. It's considered to be a model for nonprofit startup journalism. But it doesn't have a clear path. It's having some financial trouble. Its coverage is not as robust as it was a few years ago. And they are still trying to, I've read a book about nonprofit journalism around the country. I went to a conference of a national organization that fosters nonprofit journalism. And the answer is nobody's found the magic bullet yet. Nobody's found a way to make nonprofit journalism truly sustainable in a way that offers the news coverage that their audiences deserve, in a way that offers their employees livable wages and maybe even benefits as they should be. So it's still a struggle. It's still very much a work in progress. And nobody, including Digger, has figured out exactly how to make it sustainable.
One of the other culprits, I guess, in this ongoing drama is social media in general. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and I'm no longer as well versed in some of that as I like to think I used to be.
Blue Sky, TikTok.
How do you think newspapers are supposed to compete with that? Because it seems like a lot of the audience has drifted, and gets their news, as amazing as it seems to be, from things like Facebook and Instagram. That's where they find out not just about some local phenomenon, but this is where how the war in Ukraine is going. That's where they're learning about it from. And of course, obviously, you're not getting that from a source that is trying to kind of be objective or kind of look at the big picture. They're just getting one opinionated viewpoint.
Yeah, and on social media, the sort of catchy stuff is what plays and what gets clicks and therefore is promoted. And when you look at certain content on social media, their algorithms direct you to similar content, which is why, the days when we all watched the evening news, for instance, are long gone. And now we're kind of each in our own little information bubble that is partially our own choices that we make of what to read and what to watch, and partly what the algorithm suggests based on what we've already watched or read. So, if you're like reading, if your intent is to see what's going on in the nation and the world, but you get distracted by, some celebrity thing or recipes or, short catchy videos or stuff like that, then you're going to be fed more of that stuff and less of the serious stuff. So it is a big problem. I think, though, we've always had information problems and issues. The good old days were not as good as we think they were. It's not like everybody used to read the New York Times or the Washington Post. Most people didn't read newspapers, even when they were robust. And most people got their information, I don't know, before there was social media, there was probably the barber shop and the beauty salon and the general store and things like that. So, there's always been a lot of disinformation and a lot of good information, and the disinformation more often than not squeezes out the good stuff. I do think there is a path forward. I am at least cautiously optimistic that we may be moving into a better future where there at least is good quality information available locally, nationally, globally. There's a lot of good stuff that the internet has done for us and provides for us daily. It's largely on us, I think, to be smart consumers and to seek out reliable sources of information and to try not to be distracted so much by the hot video of the moment.
Right. I just want to return briefly to a point you were making there a moment ago about the importance of local journalism. I mean, it's nothing new, but I think it's worth underscoring just how important local papers were for their communities to have a trustworthy source of information about what is happening on the select board or the planning board or locally or in the police department or whatever it may be. And when that goes away, there's a real, I think, impact where the community loses contact with itself and people don't feel quite as close to their neighbors as they once did because no one's on the same page, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Do you think that's a fair concern, or?
Yeah. I think. I mean, the bread and butter of local newspapers is not so much the news. It's important for the town governments and school boards and things like that to get coverage, especially when there's something funny going on. It's also stuff like, what's happening this weekend and what are the high school sports teams doing?
Right.
And, what are the local, what's the local arts organization up to? And, what are the local theater company? And around the Hardwick area, Circus Smirkus is a big deal. That's where they're located up there in that area. So, one of the most read articles of the entire year so far in the Hardwick Gazette was a late June roundup of activities on the 4th of July weekend. That's just sort of meat and potatoes local journalism, and there's a lot of that goes on in local newspapers. And that's important. People want to know, and they want to be able to look at, where's the parade, where's the fireworks, where are the road closings going to be, and what time. All that sort of stuff. And, knowing what events are going on in the community, you're more likely to participate. You're more likely to be in a room with your neighbors. And and that's important as well. And that's a big part of the draw of a good local paper, is that kind of service to its readers and that kind of community building. And that's really a part of what the whole nonprofit model involves, a more close engagement with and interaction with the community, whether it's, you know, your readers who are now supporters and donors, advertisers who are part of the mix, you know, the affluent people in your community who might be able to give a large amount of money, locally based foundations and stuff like that. You need to be more directly engaged in your community, and not just with advertisers and with the Chamber of Commerce, but with everyone. And I think that's part of the promise of nonprofit journalism. Now, it doesn't have to be nonprofit. You know, the Manchester Journal is a for-profit newspaper, and I think it's a really good local paper. The Addison Independent is probably the best weekly in the state right now, and they are a for-profit enterprise. With a very encouraging amount of advertising in each issue. But you know, the local papers are really important, and that's why they're so attractive. That's why, you know, close to 2,000 people get the Gazette's weekly email, you know, with like the rundown of all the stories. And that's a lot of people in an area. Hardwick is a town of 3,000, and the surrounding communities are much smaller than that. So a lot of people pay attention. We're still in the process of encouraging those people to take the leap. You know, you depend on this. You used to buy a paper every week. Now maybe you're getting it online, but it's still worth, you know, chipping in $1 a week, $5 a month. And that's a new proposition to get across at a time when everybody's getting demands for money from everywhere. But you know, I think it's important. That's why I'm on the board of the Hardwick Gazette, is that I think it's important for these papers to survive.
So the idea is you have either a weekly subscription or a monthly or a yearly, and that's the main source of revenue, in addition to whatever advertising that can be attracted.
It's a mix, and it varies depending on the paper and the situation.
Yeah.
But it's partly advertising. It's partly readers giving $5 or $10 a month. It's partly just readers chipping in, you know, $50 or $100 when there's a fund drive. It's also large donors who are capable of giving a large amount of money because it's within their means to do so and they believe in the enterprise. And there are also opportunities for grants from foundations. A lot of foundations are very interested in the future of journalism. The Knight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and their organizations like the Institute for Nonprofit News and Press Forward, and LION, which is an acronym for something, and I'm not sure what, Local Independent something. Anyway, there are national organizations. I mentioned the University of Vermont Center for Community News, which is a very lively enterprise. So there's a lot of interest in this, and that's part of the mix as well. But, you know, every local enterprise, every nonprofit organization is going to have to find its own funding mix that works for it. You know, at the Gazette, we're still looking at, you know, how much money can we reasonably expect to get from just readers clicking on the donate button, or how much can we expect if we really try to push for advertising support. We don't have the answers to those questions, and we're fumbling around at the same time. We're trying to put out a weekly paper. I'm not directly involved in the weekly production, but that's a huge enterprise, and so the whole thing is, the phrase I have heard over and over again is building the plane while you're in the air. Right. And that's very much what journalism is like right now. Yeah. And you know, if you want to see the alternative, all you have to do is look at the Burlington Free Press, which used to be the dominant force and a really good newspaper. Yeah. And now, the last time I looked, I recently looked at the Free Press for a critical article about some of the content they post, which is pretty much garbage. their newsroom directory, which is on the Burlington Free Press website, has 6 people, 6 reporters.
Wow.
Which is, I posted that and I got a response on social media from somebody who used to work in the sports department at the Free Press like 30 years ago. And he wrote back and said, my God, when I was there, we had 6 people in the sports department alone. And, so they're depending on, sort of like regurgitated content created by GNAT newspaper people in Boston or New York or who knows where. A lot of the stories they publish are things like, some list of, the top something or other in every state. So somebody in the GNAT system will crank out an article for the Burlington Free Press. Hey, here's the top so-and-so in Vermont. And they don't go to the place or talk to the people. They pull all their information from the list. And recently there's something even worse in my opinion, which is the Free Press is using content from a GNAT reporter who is creating AI-assisted content that's based entirely on press releases. You take a press release, and it may be a good thing, but you take a press release, you run it through AI, you pull quotes from the press release. You don't do any independent reporting at all, and you make it look like a news story.
That's another whole area that I think is going to be filled with all kinds of opportunities and challenges. Let's be polite.
Yeah, and they're doing that because they don't have the resources to put out a good daily paper. They got to fill the news hole, as that's the term of the industry, with something, and they're doing it as cheaply as possible, and that's partly the diminished economics of news. It's also partly that corporate-owned newspapers that are part of big chains, like the Free Press, a significant portion of their proceeds are going back to the corporate masters and the shareholders. I wrote in my last piece about the Free Press that it should just die already and open up a market for maybe some nonprofit entrepreneur will come up with something that would provide some new coverage for the Burlington area, which deserves it.
Yeah. There's certainly no shortage of news coming out of there.
No.
Which leads me to one question I wanted to ask before we have to run here. Are there some areas that you feel like the press in Vermont has really not covered well? You write frequently about homeless situations, people who are struggling with homelessness, and my sense of it is that you feel like the Scott administration in particular could have done much more to have alleviated that situation or done something to make it better. I mean, are there other situations besides that you think the fact that we have 75% fewer reporters and press jobs explains why we don't know more about something?
Well, I'll give you one example, and I do not know for a fact that this is actually a problem, but one of the governor's early initiatives, and one of his biggest initiatives, was he created a new agency in state government, the Agency of Digital Services. And the idea was, instead of having each department and agency do their own technology work, which can be very wasteful. None of these people are experts, and they're all doing their own stuff, and there's no coordination. So ADS was a decent idea. Centralize all the the technology stuff into one agency that would hopefully do a good job. We have no idea whether ADS is working or not. There has been precious little coverage. It would be a really tough nut to crack. Not as tough as EB5, but not that much easier. It would require a deep dive and a knowledge of what the agency is doing and what it should be doing. Is it saving money? Is it wasting money? I have heard occasional rumblings that there are problems in the agency. but I have no idea if they're true or not. And as a blogger, I don't have the time or the resources to do that kind of digging, and nobody else does either. If ADS had been created in 2005 or 2012, there would have been a lot of reporters digging around and saying, is this thing really working? Now, I don't think there's anybody doing that. And I don't think anybody has the time or resources to do that kind of deep dive. And so I think that's a real problem for the health of public knowledge and the electorate and the good functioning of state government and democracy, ultimately. Yeah. And who knows? I think there are other potential stories out there. Maybe. I don't know. But if there are, we're not going to hear about them.
Right. And when you think about how the Associated Press used to have, what, a 3 or 4 person bureau in Montpelier that covered the State House very closely. The Rutland Herald, I think, used to have, what, 3 reporters that were...
The Herald and Times-Argus used to have a State House bureau with 3 reporters. Burlington Free Press used to have 3 people at the State House. 7 Days used to have 3 people at the State House. Now they've got basically like part of 1. Vermont Public has a lot less State House specific coverage than they used to. Even Digger is doing less than they used to at the State House. So, there's just, and, you go to press conferences sometimes and there's like more people at the podium than there are from the press, because there just aren't that many reporters around. And it's, we don't know what we're losing because of that. And, the hope is that nonprofit journalism can become robust enough that they can at least regain some of what we lost.
Right. Well, I guess we're going to have to pretty much leave it there for today, John, but I just want to say again that the News You Can Use thing is a very interesting project. One similar to the last guest we had here for a Press Pass show is a local resident, a fellow named Terry Dorsey, who is doing something similar to what you're doing, but on sort of a national level. The model is a little bit different. Takes one story and looks at how 5 or 6 kind of major news outlets, the Times, the Washington Post, I think ABC, and a few others, I can't remember exactly which outlets he tracks, how did they cover that story? And it's always kind of interesting to go look at, see the takeaway that, let's say, that the Times had, and then compare that to what Fox News did. And so he also incorporates artificial intelligence into his searches around that, but it's really quite interesting. And so when I saw I said, oh, we've got to have John here to talk about drilling down to the Vermont level on news you can use. So anyway, before we let you go here, how does somebody who wants to become a subscriber to the Vermont Political Observer go about doing it? Do they go to your website or something like that?
Yeah,
what happens?
thevpo.org, or if you search for the Vermont Political Observer, you'll find me. If you search for the VPO, you'll probably find me in the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm the one without the waltzes. But in the right-hand column of the website, if you scroll down just a little bit, there is a subscribe button. You submit your email. There's no money involved. I don't sell my list. I don't even know where the list is, anyway. That gets you an email message every time I post a new piece. So that would be how you'd subscribe. And I do have a donate button, but I don't push it very hard because, I don't need the money, and there are a lot of enterprises these days that need it more than I do.
Well, all right. Well, there you have it. So those of you who want to find more information about what's going on, now you know where to go. Anyway, John, well, once again, thank you for making the time for this conversation. It's always fun to have you here at the studio and talking about press and journalism issues here in the state. And well, we'll need to have you back again at some point again. Yeah. I'm sure there'll be something going on that we'll need to get your insights on. But anyway, that'll where we have to leave it for today. But thank you all for being with us and sharing part of your day with us. And have a good one. We'll see you the next time. Take care.